Our discussion today, it centers on the self-reflective work, 100 Questions to Ask Yourself, which is, well, it's a piece designed to guide us back to our fundamental truth, away from all the daily roles and routines we get caught up in.
And what's so interesting about it, and really what brings us here, is this internal paradox. On one hand, you have this very fixed, progressive 10-chapter sequence. It starts with your core identity, ends with your legacy. But then the author explicitly tells the reader to, and I'm quoting here, let your curiosity lead you.
Exactly. So the central question for us is that systematic, linear structure a necessary tool for genuine, comprehensive self-understanding, or does that very structure undermine the spontaneous, deeply personal nature of introspection the book seems to demand? For my part, I believe that defined framework is absolutely essential.
While I get the desire for structure, I really believe its rigidity risks limiting the genuine, curiosity-led self-discovery that the material itself seems to champion. If true insight is found in the pauses, as the book says, then forcing someone through a mandated sequence might just turn this transformative journey into, well, a methodical checklist. It could really dull the power of the questions.
I appreciate that focus on spontaneous insight. I really do. But let me offer a perspective on why that framework is so psychologically crucial. This 10-chapter structure, it acts as a complete map. It's designed to ensure no vital area of the self is missed, especially, the areas we tend to naturally avoid. The progression is not just logical, it's almost required. We have to establish our core identity and values first before we can effectively analyze our past, assess our present, or even begin to chart our future. By mandating that the reader address challenging themes like what holds me back or how am I evolving in a set order, the structure functions as an intellectual forcing mechanism. It prevents that avoidance of crucial self-analysis that, let's be honest, would probably be skipped if we only followed what felt comfortable. It demands completeness.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it, the challenge of avoidance. But the book's own introduction suggests that insight begins right where we feel that pull, telling us to take pauses when something touches you. True self-revelation is, well, it's rarely systematic, is it? If a reader is feeling this acute existential pressure, they need to grapple with questions of limitation or fear or vulnerability right then and there. To force that person to first sequentially review their childhood memories or, their current relationships, it just dilutes the urgency and the energy needed for a real breakthrough. The structure, I think, risks prioritizing this kind of organizational neatness over the messy, nonlinear path of genuine psychological insight.
You raise a powerful point about the intensity of certain questions. But self-understanding isn't just about solving acute pain. It's about forming a true, comprehensive picture of the self. The book's core strength is its breadth. It requires us to look not just inward at our identity, but also outward at our relationships and forward toward our legacy. For instance, the section on relationships makes us consider things like, what kind of friend am I, and what boundaries do I need to set? These relational dynamics are fundamental to who we are, but they're often ignored when we're just focused on our own immediate personal fears. The full, structured scope is the only guarantee of a complete portrait, rather than just a hyper-focus on the most resonant fragment.
I agree that completeness is the goal, but at what cost to the immediate transformative experience? I just question whether forcing that comprehensive scope waters down the intensity of the truly critical questions. If the goal is a return to you, as the book says, then maybe the maximum value comes from intensely focusing only on the chapter that feels most urgent, say, deeply engaging with questions about mortality and legacy, rather than superficially covering all 10 areas just to satisfy a checklist. The instruction to take sustained pauses seems to suggest that deep, intense engagement with a few potent points is inherently more valuable than a broad, shallow coverage of all 100 questions.
And yet, that linearity is entirely justified when we look at the structure's elegant handling of time. The book establishes this very natural sequential flow. It moves from the influences of the past to asking, what patterns from my childhood do I still repeat today? Through a necessary assessment of the present, and then finally to charting the future.
Logically, you just can't authentically and sustainably chart a course forward without first diagnosing the deeply inherited patterns of the past. That historical analysis, that self-archaeology provides the necessary foundation for any serious future planning.
See, I'd frame the influence of the past a little differently. Well, sure, acknowledging history is useful. Focusing too heavily on historical analysis can actually become its own self-limiting pattern. The material has these incredibly empowering, future-focused elements like, what would I try if I knew I couldn't fail? Or the purpose-driven question, what can I uniquely offer to the world? I mean, these questions are inherently motivating. They demand action now. They're powerful enough to stand alone and inspire immediate change. And I don't think their effectiveness requires all this strict prerequisite work in the preceding chapters, especially since the author themselves suggests our answers are transient anyway.
But that brings us directly to the role of iteration, which I believe is precisely what validates the structure. I fully accept this isn't a book you finish, and that your answers will change. Of course they will. That definitive structure then serves as a stable anchor, a consistent benchmark against which future growth, asking what version of myself am I becoming, can be objectively measured when the reader returns a year later. If the map itself constantly shifts, how can we track our personal movement?
I see the utility of a benchmark. But if the material is fundamentally designed to be returned to, implying those initial answers are just provisional, then the definitive sequential ordering becomes philosophically less important than the sheer power of the isolated questions themselves. The real value, then, lies in the reader's humility, their open-mindedness when they revisit their own initial truth. They have to be willing to acknowledge they were wrong or that they've changed. And that openness is exemplified by questions that encourage self-forgiveness and radical learning, like, what mistake am I willing to make for the sake of learning? The structure might provide a good entry point, but I think the true breakthroughs happen when the reader trusts their own urgency and breaks that sequence.
So, to sum up, my position is that the book offers a necessary, systematic roadmap for introspection. It ensures a comprehensive engagement with your identity, your origins, your future, and your legacy. It provides a logical movement from understanding who you are to defining what you will leave behind. It guarantees a thorough journey.
And I maintain that the success of this book is likely achieved not by systematic compliance, but by the reader's freedom to abandon linearity and dive deeply into the most resonant and, frankly, often the most difficult questions, those concerning fear, vulnerability, forgiveness, whenever that moment of deepest curiosity strikes.
Ultimately, the material succeeds because it provides that essential, quiet space to pause, to listen to yourself.
Yes. And that space is potent regardless of whether the journey someone takes is structured by the 10 chapters or driven entirely by personal, momentary curiosity. The inherent tension between the systematic structure and the invitation to nonlinear discovery, I think that only deepens the experience of self-inquiry, challenging the reader to decide which approach to their own truth is best for them right now.